there aren't much experiences in life as captivating, mysterious, and surreal as dreams. And you probably had one last night. They can range from your deepest hopes and desires to frighteningly bizarre nightmares, and even beautiful, abstract, moving paintings. Dreams are unpredictable, but they affect the way we live our lives in ways that sometimes we don't even notice. And they're so common that we rarely ask ourselves why. Why do we dream? Well, there may be a lot of possible competing explanations, but a recent one is really interesting, and I need to talk about it. It proposes that dreams may be caused by something called neurocompetition. This video was inspired by the first chapters of a super amazing book I'm reading called Livewired. Let me show it to you. This book, I'm reading this book, and I highly recommend it. It's not sponsored. Moving on. So that you can really grasp the connection between neurocompetition and dreams, you need to know about a few things first. And in our path of discovery, you'll find out about a constant raging battle for territory going on inside you every second of every day. Right here. And even what we could expect of the dreams of alien civilizations across the universe. And also cows. Oops, this is not a cow. Holy Jesus. Okay, let's get to it. As you may be aware, there are a range of animals who can stand up and just walk or run in the same day that they're born. This seems completely extraordinary given our own standards. Compared to this, human newborn babies seem kind of right? Other animals seem to be much more prepared to deal with the universe, with the world, with what surrounds them than humans. At least at the beginning, before we catch up to them. And boy, do we catch up to them. Because the fact that we aren't prepared when we come to the world means that we have more space for adaptation. We aren't as pre-scripted as other animals, and that gives us more flexibility to grow and to adapt. This is probably no news to you. But that flexibility is not only manifested in our ability to walk, but also in our brains. You may have heard about the concept of neuroplasticity, meaning that human brains are much more able to change as time goes along. And this is absolutely true, but it creates some problems. For example, cases of people who are isolated from the world, and as a consequence they do not develop the usual skills that a human person normally has. I apologize for the dark example, but children who were kept inside basements until they are teenagers present huge cognitive deficits. Our dependency on input, on stimulation, becomes visible in those cases. This happens because our brains are built and develop upon the stimulation that we receive from our environment. Just like our legs come unprepared to walk, our brains come half-baked and they need some juicy inputs to develop their normal skills. Our brain seems to be task-dependent. It develops, grows and adapts so that it can perform the tasks that are asked of it. If you never ask someone to speak, their brains won't develop the hardware needed to do that. The same happens with vision, or the lack of it. We'll get to that in a little bit. But the reality of the situation is, even if we develop a given skill, it doesn't mean that it stays there forever. Let me show you. Did you know that humans have an internal brain map of their bodies? Like, actually? Yeah, pretty amazing. But how can this happen if our brain is hidden in a little skull without any light whatsoever? Because as we interact with the world, the parts of our body that are adjacent to each other, for example, our fingers and our palms, get stimulated at the same time, like when you slap someone. Parts of your body which are closer tend to get stimulated more often at the same time. It is more common for you to activate your connections between your fingers and your palm, like I just demonstrated, than between your knee and your palm. This leads to the creation of a body map in your brain because neurons that fire together wire together. One more time. Neurons that fire together wired together. So what happens is that the signals sent from your fingers and your palms to your brain will stimulate some neurons. Those neurons will, as a consequence, fire at the same time, fire together. And so they will wire together. This means that they tend to strengthen their connections, which in turn makes it easier for them to communicate, creating maps due to input and stimulation. But this construction of maps in your brain is not static. As we've seen, our brain is very malleable. And so what do you think would happen if you just lost a hand? The part of your brain that was dedicated to mapping your fingers and palms would no longer be needed, so it would be conquered by your adjacently mapped body parts. When it comes to losing a hand, your arm representations will encroach on the space previously occupied by it. This is exactly what happens to people who lose limbs. This is what I mean by neurocompetition. Our extreme flexibility exists because neurons are always engaged in a fierce competition for cortical space, for territory in your brains. And they can only resist, hold their ground, and maintain their connections in the presence of stimulation. When that stimulation is gone, their connections are gone, and so the space that they have conquered for themselves vanishes. But this doesn't only happen when we lose parts of our body, it happens all the time. This is what happens for people who become blind. Basically, their visual cortex, which is no longer needed, no longer receiving inputs from the outside world, gets taken over by other senses. You've probably heard that blind people can have a better sense of hearing and smell, and that is true, because the part of their brains which was dedicated to seeing gets enslaved and put to work for their new masters, the other senses. You need to understand that more brain power means that you are better at the task, and consequently, less brain power means that you're worse. In reality, the speed at which this conquering occurs is absolutely astounding. You don't need to be blind for this to happen. Studies show that even if you are blindfolded for just a couple of hours, your visual cortex, which usually only gets activated by visual tasks, gets activated by touch and smell. The invading forces are quick, deadly, and they show no mercy. That's why it's called neurocompetition. To illustrate that your neurons are constantly fighting for supremacy inside your head, which is pretty amazing. So let's go back to dreams. As you may be aware, dreams are extremely visual experiences. It's almost like your brain is simulating actual visual experience. And it is. Your dreams hold a level of detail that wouldn't be expected from an unconscious being, unless there's a purpose behind it. And there is. The novel proposal for why dreams happen posits that dreams are a way for your brain to keep stimulating itself in the absence of visual input. As you may have noticed, during most of our evolutionary history, humans spent half of their time in total darkness, as nights fell. While this doesn't happen so much anymore due to the technological ubiquity in our lives, our bodies were designed in that environment, where half of the time there's very little to none visual input. There seems to be a problem. If your visual cortex starts getting taken over, even if you are in darkness just a couple of hours, what do you think would happen every single night? If every single night your other senses were trying to conquer, and they are trying to conquer your brain space dedicated to processing visual content, and every single night there was no visual input, could it be that we would gradually lose our visual capabilities? Would our brain gradually lose its ability to process visual stimulus? Evolutionary forces seem to think so, and a clever mechanism was devised, a defense against the continuous cortical onslaught to dream, to generate fake visual information to your brain, so that it doesn't lose its ability to see. Well, I could end it there, but there's something really interesting about this hypothesis. If it holds true, it allows us to make predictions about species that we still haven't found. If we ever find species across the universe who sleep and have similar bodies to ours, and at the same time have a day and night cycle where there's very, very little visual input for long periods of time, we can predict that maybe, just maybe, their dreams will be similar to ours. So, now that you have put this all into your ever-changing brain, maybe the next time you wake up from a dream, whether it was the best one or one of the worst you've ever had, you may remember that your dreams are a shield, a clever biological defense to guard yourself against an unwanted consequence of what makes us human. Our brain's unrelenting, almost self-destructing flexibility. That's it for me today. Another video based on this book will show up here when it is finished, so yeah, if you like this one, you should check out this one, this one, this one, this one.